The flight took off from California at 2 a.m., unscheduled, unannounced, and in complete secrecy, carrying a solitary passenger. He hadn't slept in 36 hours, and he wouldn't sleep for another 48. Prince Harry wasn't on board for any royal engagements or a carefully orchestrated family visit. No, this flight was different. It was an urgent, impromptu journey back to the UK, driven by a devastating revelation that threatened to unravel everything Harry had worked tirelessly to build, everything he'd fiercely defended, and most painfully, everything he thought he knew about the woman he had chosen to spend his life with. The bombshell had been dropped by none other than Sarah Ferguson. With a simple phone call, Sarah had cast a long, dark shadow over Harry's entire existence, and now he was on this flight, racing against time to face the consequences. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. He had spent years distancing himself from the royal family, battling to protect Meghan from the toxicity of royal life, only to find himself, once again, drawn back into the very world he had tried so desperately to escape. Everything he had fought for, everything he believed to be true about his marriage, was now at risk. The call came late the night before, its timing deliberate, a chilling interruption in the stillness of Harry's late-night thoughts. It was Sarah directly on the other end of the line, but rather a palace intermediary, someone tasked with delivering a message Harry couldn't afford to ignore. The voice was cold, matter-of-fact, and carried the weight of something far more ominous than idle gossip. "Sarah has materials," the voice said, the words hanging in the air like a death sentence. "Letters, recordings, evidence that ties Meghan to Andrew's yacht days. She's going public with all of it unless you come to London and confront this head-on." The words were sharp, cutting through the haze of exhaustion and confusion that had settled over Harry. His heart raced as the enormity of what was being said slowly began to sink in. This wasn't a threat born of petty jealousy or a desire for revenge. It was a full-scale attack on everything he thought he knew about Meghan, about the life they had built together. And it was clear, Sarah wasn't bluffing. If Harry didn't act, if he didn't face this head-on, the carefully constructed narrative of his life, his marriage, and his new identity would collapse under the weight of the truth Sarah held in her hands. Harry had spent years carefully distancing himself from Andrew, not just in physical space, but in every sense of the word. He had publicly condemned his uncle's appalling behavior, declaring his outrage at the scandals that had tarnished the family name. He had walked away from the royal family altogether, rejecting the very institution that had caused him so much pain, all in an effort to protect Meghan from what he had come to view as a toxic, suffocating world. And yet, in a cruel twist of fate, here he was, on a plane, hurtling back toward that very world, the world he thought he had left behind. The irony was not lost on him. He had spent so long trying to escape, to carve out a new life for himself and Meghan, only to find himself drawn back into the very storm he had fought so hard to outrun. Panic gnawed at him, gnawing at the edges of his calm exterior, threatening to take over. What Sarah Ferguson had told him over that crackling transatlantic line wasn't just uncomfortable gossip or wild tabloid speculation. No, this was something far more ominous. It was specific, it was detailed, and most terrifying of all, it was backed by hard evidence, evidence that Sarah claimed to have held onto for years, waiting for the precise moment to release it. A moment she had now determined had arrived. As Harry stared out of the window, the weight of the situation settled over him. This was no longer a simple scandal to dismiss or ignore. This was a threat that would destroy everything he thought he knew. And as the plane soared through the night sky, he couldn't help but wonder just how far Sarah was willing to go, and whether, in the end, it would be him who would bear the brunt of her reckoning. Throughout the flight, Harry was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions, oscillating between disbelief and dread, his mind unable to grasp the full magnitude of what was unfolding. He scrolled through encrypted messages from palace insiders, each update more chilling than the last. Some of the information was familiar, things he had heard whispered about in private circles but had never fully absorbed. Some he had deliberately ignored, dismissing them as mere rumors or unsubstantiated gossip. But then came the worst of it, the new, the unexpected, the unthinkable. The information hit him like a tidal wave. Details about timelines, meetings, relationships, things that predated his own connection to Meghan by years. Information that, if true, didn't merely complicate the narrative he had been presenting to the world, it utterly rewrote it. The story he had so carefully crafted, the life he had so meticulously built around a carefully protected image of Meghan as the innocent victim, now appeared to be based on a series of lies and omissions. Every message, every new piece of evidence was another layer of truth unraveling, revealing a history he hadn't known or had refused to acknowledge. What had once seemed like a clear and uncomplicated path now felt like a treacherous maze, and Harry found himself unable to stop the descent into a truth he hadn't been ready to face. His world, once so carefully constructed, was beginning to crumble, piece by piece, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. By the time the plane began its descent into Heathrow, Harry was no longer the man who had boarded the flight just hours before. The overwhelming storm of emotions and revelations had transformed him, leaving him with a singular, undeniable truth. The woman waiting for him in California, the one he had devoted himself to and defended against all odds, wasn't the only one with secrets. Every part of his reality, every belief he held about his marriage, his life, and the woman he loved, was now shrouded in the shadow of doubt. He had always assumed that Meghan's past, though imperfect, had been a reflection of her resilience and strength. But now, everything was in question. And Sarah Ferguson, once a peripheral figure, someone he thought he understood, was no longer the quiet, distant relative. No, she was now a formidable force in his life, one who had patiently waited for years to reveal the secrets she held in her hands. The truth she carried, the evidence she possessed, was a detonator, one she had been waiting to activate at just the right moment. And that moment had arrived. Sarah had done her homework, gathered her ammunition, and was now ready to bring the truth to light, no longer willing to remain silent or protect Harry from the world of lies and deception she believed he had been living in. Harry's heart sank as the realization hit him. He had spent years attempting to protect Meghan, to shelter her from the brutal realities of the royal family and its toxic past, only to find that the world he had desperately tried to shield her from was now bearing down on him and her. The more Sarah had to say, the more Harry understood. His carefully constructed narrative was on the verge of collapse. The secrets Sarah held, letters, recordings, logbooks, were not mere rumors. They were facts, concrete and undeniable, threatening to unravel everything Harry had believed to be true about his wife, his family, and his own place in this fractured world. As the plane's wheels touched down on the tarmac, Harry knew that this was no longer just a battle for his marriage, it was a fight for his very identity. The narrative he had clung to was no longer tenable, and Sarah Ferguson was done keeping her truth locked away. She had made her move, and now Harry was trapped in a game of chess, with every piece he moved potentially leading to disaster. But before Harry could even clear customs, before he had the chance to confront Sarah face to face and demand answers, the story had already begun to leak to the press. The first whispers of the explosive allegations began to trickle out, slipping through the cracks of the royal machine, spreading like wildfire. The carefully curated image of Harry and Meghan, the version of their love story that had been so meticulously protected, was now being pulled apart in real time. Headlines began to emerge, each one more damning than the last, each one chipping away at the facade Harry had spent years building. And as the rumors swirled, the pressure mounted. The flight that had felt like an emergency escape was now beginning to feel like the easy part. The true nightmare, Harry realized, was only just beginning. What was about to unfold, what was already unfolding, would make his rushed flight to the UK seem like a simple prelude to the storm that was about to consume everything. The stakes were no longer just personal. This wasn't just about his marriage or his family. This was about a public reckoning, a fight to salvage what little credibility he had left, and a race against time to confront the truth before it tore apart everything he thought he understood. The media, ever hungry for the next scandal, was already turning their attention toward the royal couple, turning the story into a spectacle. The leaks, though still in their infancy, were creating a tidal wave of speculation, gossip, and in some cases, outright condemnation. There would be no time to prepare, no time to gather the pieces of his shattered world. The press, always lurking, was now in full pursuit, and Harry knew with a sickening certainty that nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah Ferguson hadn't chosen this moment by accident. She had sat in the shadows for years, watching with a quiet, calculating patience. As Meghan's rise from actress to duchess to global celebrity unfolded, Sarah observed from the periphery, her eyes sharp, her judgment unclouded by the gloss of public adoration. She had witnessed Harry's unwavering defense of Meghan, watching him battle the press, the palace, and his own family to protect her from every accusation, every harsh word thrown their way. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Sarah had seen the royal family scramble, covering up scandal after scandal, all the while the real story, the one she knew intimately, remained buried in the darkness. But something shifted in late 2025. The air had changed. There was a palpable shift in the dynamic, a sense of impending reckoning that Sarah couldn't ignore. Maybe it was Andrew's legal troubles finally catching up to the family in ways that were impossible to sweep under the rug. Perhaps it was the sight of Meghan continuing to profit from her victim narrative, a narrative that the public had bought into, while Sarah knew a very different version of events, one that was far more complicated and far more troubling. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the slow realization that Harry, the nephew who had always shown her kindness, the one royal who had offered her genuine warmth and understanding even after her divorce, was being played in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. Whatever it was, Sarah had finally reached the breaking point. She was no longer willing to stay silent, no longer willing to watch from the sidelines as Harry, her own flesh and blood, remained blinded by a carefully constructed illusion. The time had come for Sarah to speak, to release the truth she had carefully guarded for so long, and to finally shatter the glossy, perfected image the world had of Meghan and Harry. She had seen too much, known too much, and now it was time for the world to hear her side of the story. The stakes had never been higher, and Sarah knew that once she spoke, there would be no going back. Whatever the reason, Sarah had reached her tipping point. She made the decision to go nuclear. No more waiting, no more silent observation. The world was about to hear her truth, and it was going to shake the foundations of everything. Sarah chose the most public of stages to unleash her bombshell. She appeared on Piers Morgan's podcast, her calm demeanor masking the gravity of what was about to be revealed. Then, with chilling precision, she said the words that would reverberate around the world for months to come. Meghan Markle was Prince Andrew's first client. Those words, so simple yet so devastating, were a calculated strike. In an instant, they turned the spotlight away from Harry's carefully constructed narrative, away from the victim story Meghan had so masterfully curated, and focused it squarely on the heart of the scandal Sarah had been holding for years. The phrase "first client" was a loaded one, deliberate, damning, and impossible to ignore. It wasn't a slip of the tongue or a reckless accusation. No, it was a bomb dropped with intent, meant to unravel the web of lies and half-truths that had ensnared not just Harry, but the entire royal family. The implications were immediate, the fallout undeniable. Sarah hadn't just exposed a past, she had laid bare a hidden reality that the palace and the world had been too afraid to confront. And as her words echoed through the media, there would be no escaping the truth. That phrase, "first client," was far more than just casual language. It wasn't a slip of the tongue, nor a tabloid exaggeration meant for sensationalism. No, it was deliberate, calculated, and devastatingly specific. Every word, every pause had been chosen with surgical precision. In Sarah Ferguson's world, in the circles where Andrew's behavior had been the subject of whispered conversations but never publicly confirmed, the word client held immense weight. It wasn't a term used lightly. Client implied something far more than a mere social encounter or fleeting connection. It suggested a transaction, an arrangement possibly hidden from the public eye, built on something much deeper, much darker than mere romance or coincidence. The word client carried with it the unmistakable suggestion of intent, of something orchestrated, planned. It painted a picture of Meghan's presence in Andrew's world not as an innocent accident, but as part of a carefully crafted dynamic, one that had been far more intentional than anyone had ever guessed. Most striking of all, the use of the term client underscored that Meghan's connection to Andrew wasn't just known to the people who mattered, it was likely embraced by them. In that single phrase, Sarah had shattered the image of Meghan as a passive participant, a naive outsider who stumbled into the royal orbit. Instead, it painted Meghan as someone who had been well aware of the relationship she was entering, someone who had maneuvered within this world with a purpose, someone who had played a part in a much bigger, much murkier story than anyone had ever dared to imagine. And in doing so, Sarah had set a bomb under the carefully curated narratives surrounding both Andrew and Meghan, a bomb that was poised to explode, taking everything in its wake. Sarah didn't just drop that phrase and walk away, leaving the world to speculate. No, she doubled down. She leaned into the storm she had unleashed, offering no room for doubt, no chance for Meghan or the palace to deflect the truth. Sarah made it clear to her peers that she wasn't just making baseless accusations. She had evidence, real, tangible evidence. She spoke of letters, private, personal correspondence containing intimate details that only someone truly present, someone who had witnessed the events firsthand, could possibly know. These weren't vague recollections or second-hand rumors. These were specifics, written words that told a story no one could easily dismiss. But she didn't stop there. Sarah went further, mentioning recordings, actual preserved conversations, captured in ways that left no room for ambiguity. These weren't fleeting moments or offhand comments. They were voices, caught in unguarded exchanges, conversations that revealed a level of familiarity and comfort that contradicted the public narrative. They were evidence of something much deeper than what the world had been led to believe. And most importantly, Sarah made it clear that her actions weren't driven by jealousy or a thirst for revenge. This wasn't about personal vendettas or settling old scores. No, this was about Harry. This was about protecting him from a truth he had been shielded from for far too long. Harry, the nephew who had always shown her kindness, the royal who had stood by her even when others had turned their backs. He was the one she was trying to protect. It wasn't about tearing down Meghan or destroying their marriage. It was about revealing a truth that, in Sarah's eyes, Harry had a right to know, no matter how painful it might be. It was about protecting him from a world of lies and deceit, a world where everything he thought he knew was beginning to crumble. The brilliance of Sarah's strategy lay in her ability to target both Andrew and Meghan simultaneously, a masterstroke of calculated precision. By linking Meghan to Andrew's infamous Yacht days, she didn't just expose a hidden chapter in their lives, she placed the palace in an impossible position. If they chose to defend Meghan, they risked reopening Andrew's long-buried scandals, dragging the entire royal family into a quagmire of accusations and damaging public scrutiny. If they condemned Sarah and tried to discredit her claims, they would only risk pushing her further into the spotlight, inviting the release of even more devastating evidence that could bring down everything in its path. And then there was the option of silence, a dangerous, passive choice. By remaining silent, the palace allowed the story to fester, to grow unchecked in the media, until it metastasized into something far worse than anyone could have predicted. Every unspoken word, every refusal to engage, would feed the fire, letting the truth smolder until it reached an inferno. The monarchy, already teetering on the edge after years of scandals tied to Andrew's actions, found itself facing a choice with no clear victory. Each path was fraught with risks, each step a misstep waiting to happen. But for Harry, the stakes were even higher. He had fewer options than anyone. Unlike the institution that could retreat into silence or damage control, Harry had built his entire post-royal identity on one central, unwavering narrative. Meghan was the victim, and he was the protector, the hero standing against a toxic, malicious system. If Sarah's claims were true, if the Yacht days and the hidden truths held any weight, then Harry wasn't the hero in this story. He was a casualty of his own misplaced loyalty. Caught between his wife's secrets and his family's crumbling reputation, Harry faced a choice that could destroy everything. The game Sarah had played was far from over, and for Harry, it was a game with no winners, only varying degrees of loss. Unlike the institution that could retreat into silence or spin its own narrative, Harry had crafted his entire post-royal identity around one central, unshakable story. Meghan was the victim, the palace was the villain, and he, in all his defiance, was the hero who had saved her from the suffocating grip of an outdated toxic system. This narrative had become the foundation of everything he had done since stepping away from royal life. The speeches, the public appearances, the battles with the media. It was the lens through which the world saw him, and it was the narrative he had clung to, believing it to be true. But if Sarah's claims held any weight, if the yacht days were real, if the timeline she had meticulously laid out matched up with reality, then the truth would rip the very heart out of his identity. Because in that case, Harry wasn't the hero. He wasn't the knight in shining armor fighting to protect his wife from an unforgiving monarchy. No, he was the last chapter in a much darker, much longer book, one that had been written long before Meghan ever entered his life. The story he thought he was living, the narrative he had so carefully constructed, was a lie, and if he acknowledged even a fraction of Sarah's claims, everything he had fought for would collapse into a pile of rubble. He had built his new life around a version of the truth that was now in question. If Sarah was right, Harry's role wasn't that of the savior. He wasn't the one who had protected Meghan from a cruel and unjust world. He was just another pawn in a much larger, much messier game. A game where the lines between victim and villain, hero and fool, had always been blurred. And the realization that his own story might not be the one he thought he was living would send shockwaves through his entire existence. And the evidence Sarah claimed to have wasn't some abstract, intangible accusation. It was real, solid, concrete. According to Sarah, she didn't just have rumors or hearsay. She possessed physical, verifiable evidence that could not be brushed aside or swept under the rug. And physical evidence changes everything. Testimony can be disputed. Memories can be questioned, warped, or forgotten over time. Motives can be attacked, twisted into something unrecognizable. But letters with handwriting, those couldn't be fabricated. Recordings with voices, they were irrefutable. Logbooks with dates detailing precise movements and interactions. They were hard evidence, undeniable and difficult to explain away. These were things that couldn't be dismissed with a wave of the hand or a quick deflection. They were facts preserved in time, intangible and yet impossibly real. For Harry, this was the most terrifying part. This wasn't about the kind of vague rumors that could be brushed off by a well-placed denial or a carefully crafted statement. This was evidence that had weight, that had substance, that could not be ignored without consequences. If Sarah's evidence was real, if it was authenticated and brought to the public, everything Harry thought he knew about Meghan, about his marriage, and about the story he had been telling the world would be irrevocably shattered. The truth Sarah was holding could rewrite everything, and Harry knew it. He was no longer in control of the narrative, and the evidence Sarah had in her hands could destroy the life he had built. According to Sarah, she didn't just remember Meghan being present on Andrew's yachts. She had proof, tangible proof that could not be disputed. The letters Sarah claimed to possess weren't just polite thank you notes or formal correspondence that could be easily written off. No, these letters were deeply personal, written with a level of familiarity that could only come from two people who had spent significant time together, in private, in intimate settings. Sarah described these letters as revealing more than just pleasantries. They contained references to specific, private moments aboard the yachts. There were jokes about incidents that only someone who had actually been there, who had witnessed the events firsthand, could possibly understand. The letters mentioned yacht staff by their nicknames, giving an insider's perspective on the workings of the yacht, a level of detail that would be impossible for an outsider to have. There were mentions of cabins and decks that only the inner circle would know about, areas of the yacht that weren't visible to casual day trip guests, and certainly not to the public eye. In short, these letters painted a picture of an ongoing, personal connection between Meghan and Andrew, one that went far beyond a fleeting or innocent encounter. They suggested a closeness, an intimacy, that would be impossible to ignore. And what made them truly dangerous wasn't just the content, but the authenticity of it all. The language used, the private details, the personal nature of the writing, each element reinforced Sarah's claim that Meghan had not simply been a guest on Andrew's yachts, but someone who had been deeply involved in that world, with a level of comfort that raised far more questions than it answered. The handwriting mattered, Sarah claimed, because it couldn't be forged. It was a detail that gave the letters weight, a vital piece of authenticity that would be impossible to dismiss. If those letters existed, and if they were authenticated, there would be no room for doubt. They would prove that Meghan wasn't just a casual guest on Andrew's yachts. No, she had been deeply embedded in that world, comfortable enough, familiar enough, and intimate enough to write about it afterward with the ease and familiarity that only someone who truly belonged could. But Sarah knew that even letters could be explained away. Perhaps they were taken out of context. Perhaps the tone could be misinterpreted, twisted into something more innocent than it really was. Maybe, just maybe, the relationship between Meghan and Andrew wasn't as it appeared. But that's where the recordings came in, where the letters alone fell short. The recordings, Sarah claimed, were the smoking gun. Unlike letters, which could be questioned, the voice in a recording couldn't be manipulated in the same way. And these weren't just vague accounts or second-hand recollections. These were real, preserved conversations, unedited, unaltered. Conversations between Andrew and Meghan, caught in moments of unguarded, relaxed exchange. These were voices, captured in the kind of intimate settings that painted a much clearer picture of the relationship between them. Conversations that could be analyzed, scrutinized, and authenticated through voice identification technology, proof, once and for all, that Meghan had been more involved with Andrew than she had ever let on. Sarah knew that once the recordings were heard, once they were out in the world, the letters, no matter how damning, would be secondary. The truth would be undeniable. Sarah claimed she had audio, actual, preserved conversations between Andrew and Meghan from the yacht days. These weren't second-hand accounts or hearsay passed along through unreliable sources. No, this was irrefutable evidence, real voices, captured in moments of unguarded intimacy. Conversations that felt raw and personal, the kind people have when they believe they're alone, when they think no one else is listening. According to Sarah, these recordings weren't fleeting exchanges. They were deep, familiar, and relaxed, marked by the kind of tone that only emerges from long-established comfort and intimacy. The way Meghan spoke to Andrew in these conversations, at ease, familiar, even affectionate, contradicted everything the world thought it knew. About her past, to the public, Meghan had always been the distant, polished figure who had risen from actress to duchess, a woman who was cast as the innocent outsider, often misunderstood and unfairly targeted by the media. But the tone of these recordings, Sarah insisted, painted a different picture entirely. They revealed a Meghan far more involved, far more connected to Andrew's world than anyone had realized. The recordings, if they were ever played, would shatter the carefully constructed image Meghan had cultivated, laying bare a reality no one had been prepared for. For Harry, the existence of these recordings would have been unbearable. The raw, undeniable truth they carried would have struck at the very core of everything he believed. Once you hear someone's voice in a context they've never acknowledged, once you hear them speaking to someone they've long claimed not to know well, it becomes impossible to unhear. Every word, every tone becomes etched into your memory. No amount of denial or rationalization can erase it. If those recordings existed, and Sarah claimed they did, then they didn't just document a part of history. They preserved it, locked it in a form that was unassailable. The beauty of audio evidence was its permanence. These weren't just vague, questionable memories or testimonies open to interpretation. These were voices, captured in real time in real settings, doing what they could to conceal nothing. The recordings could be played, replayed, analyzed, and scrutinized, each instance offering proof that could either confirm or dismantle everything Harry thought he knew. The impact of those recordings wasn't just their content, it was the way they would change the narrative forever. They would expose the truth, once and for all, and that truth was something Harry couldn't control. And if the recordings were real, they wouldn't just shatter his understanding of Meghan and their past. They would dismantle his very identity as the protector, the hero, the one who had fought so hard to defend the woman he loved. Then there were the driver's logbooks. These weren't just fleeting recollections or general impressions, but hard, concrete records, meticulously kept schedules that detailed every trip, every movement. Andrew's personal driver, who had already testified under oath during the 2024 Epstein-related proceedings, came forward publicly with these logbooks, offering damning evidence of trips involving Meghan. These were no ordinary work logs. They were specific, precise entries, dates, times, pickup locations, destinations, and durations of each trip meticulously recorded. Each detail painted a picture of someone who wasn't just a casual guest in Andrew's world, but someone who had been repeatedly involved in these discreet, often secretive journeys. The driver, following standard procedure for high-profile clients, had been instructed to document every movement with absolute accuracy. These weren't the kind of vague entries you might expect from a private driver. These were deliberate, thorough accounts of someone who had been closely involved with Andrew's inner circle over a long period of time. The trips were carefully tracked, always to discreet locations, away from the public eye, destinations that had been purposefully kept hidden from the press and the public. What made the logbooks so incredibly damaging wasn't just the consistency of the entries, but the pattern they revealed. The repeated appearance of Meghan's name year after year wasn't a coincidence. It was proof, evidence of an ongoing, deliberate connection between her and Andrew. And with these logs, the driver wasn't simply recalling memories. He was presenting verifiable facts, solid evidence that couldn't easily be refuted. The logbooks provided structure to Sarah's claims, transforming them from abstract allegations into a timeline of verified, documented reality. Meghan wasn't just a one-time guest, the driver claimed. Her name appeared in his logs time and again, over several months, with such regularity that it could no longer be brushed off as a coincidence. Each entry followed the same detailed procedure, prearranged trips, clear instructions, and Meghan consistently described as a special guest. The pattern in those logs was what made them so damning. Coincidence might happen once, maybe twice, but when the same name repeatedly pops up in meticulously detailed records, it stops feeling like a random occurrence. It begins to look like something far more deliberate, a carefully orchestrated arrangement. And arrangements, by definition, are far more significant than chance encounters. They imply planning, intention, and mutual understanding. These weren't impulsive decisions made on a whim. These were coordinated, purposeful movements, actions that suggested an ongoing, agreed-upon connection. Meghan wasn't just passively swept into Andrew's world. She was actively participating, involved in a setup that required preparation and foresight. The repeated appearances in these logs weren't incidental. They told a story of something far more structured, something that, if true, could dismantle the carefully constructed narrative about Meghan's innocence and her supposed naivety in relation to Andrew's world. The logbooks turned Sarah's claims from mere allegations into undeniable documentation. What had once been a series of whispers and conjecture now stood as concrete evidence. It wasn't just memory anymore, it was proof. And while Harry had known some of this information before boarding the flight, what he was about to learn, what was waiting for him in the messages, was far worse than anything he could have imagined. Somewhere over the Atlantic, trapped in a metal tube with only his thoughts and his phone for company, the real bombshell detonated. It wasn't the public allegations. It was Sarah's bombastic podcast appearance that would set the media world ablaze. No, it was something far more insidious. It was the private information that palace insiders had been holding onto, sitting on for just the right moment, waiting for when Harry was unreachable. And of course, that moment had arrived. While Harry sat on the plane, unable to contact Meghan, unable to strategize with his PR team, and unable to make any calls to settle the chaos, he was bombarded with messages that carried the weight of truth he wasn't ready to face. The timeline issue began innocuously enough. One of Harry's few remaining allies inside the palace sent a simple text. "Do you know when Meghan first met Andrew?" Harry's response was quick, "Sure. They've never met. Maybe briefly at some public event years ago. Nothing significant." It was the kind of answer he had believed to be true, the kind of answer that fit neatly into the narrative he had constructed for himself and for the world. But the reply that came back was swift and jarring, accompanied by undeniable evidence. Photographs from a private London party in 2009, showing Meghan clearly identifiable, standing close to Andrew, both laughing, both relaxed, both holding drinks. The metadata on the photos was irrefutable. 2009, the message read, the truth sinking in slowly. 3 years before you even met her. That simple fact felt like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a chance encounter at some public event. This was a deeper, more sustained connection that Harry hadn't been prepared for. Then came the bombshell. Photos from a private London party in 2009. Meghan, unmistakably identifiable, standing close to Andrew. Both of them relaxed, both holding drinks. The photos didn't leave room for doubt. The metadata was irrefutable. 2009, 3 years before Harry even met Meghan. That alone was a gut punch, a shattering of the narrative Harry had always believed. That wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what followed. What Harry would soon realize was the full scale of the deception. A series of messages came through, each from different sources, all bearing the same chilling revelations. The yacht trip Sarah had referenced didn't stop when Andrew's Epstein connections became public. No, they continued for years, and shockingly, even overlapped with periods when Meghan was already in Harry's life. She was already being introduced to the royal family, already building a relationship with Harry, already being positioned as his serious girlfriend and ultimately his future wife. The overlap was nothing short of catastrophic. If Meghan had known Andrew before meeting Harry, it would have been uncomfortable, yes, but potentially explainable. If she had been aboard his yachts years ago, it could have been dismissed as a youthful indiscretion, a chapter from a past she had left behind. But if the relationship had continued, if she had maintained contact with Andrew while she was dating Harry, then everything Harry had fought so fiercely to protect, everything he had believed about trust, honesty, and transparency, was nothing but a lie. Harry read these messages in real time, each one landing with a brutal force, like a physical blow to his chest. Screenshots of text exchanges, travel records, testimonies from yacht staff, all pointing to a truth he hadn't wanted to face. The worst one came last, a message from someone Harry had known since childhood, someone with no hidden agenda other than concern. She was still visiting Andrew's properties 6 months before your engagement. Multiple witnesses. "I'm sorry you're finding out this way, but you need to know before you see Sarah." That message hit Harry like a sucker punch. 6 months before the engagement. Meghan, the woman he believed he was building a future with, had been visiting Andrew's properties during the exact period he thought they were beginning their life together. The shock of it, the betrayal of it, was overwhelming. Everything Harry had thought he knew about his relationship, about Meghan's past, was now in question. The foundation he had built his entire post-royal identity on was starting to crumble, and there was nothing he could do to stop it.